Hello and welcome to this presentation on Reichardt-cyclorama. In the summer of 2022, the Rijksmuseum had XXL paper on show, with the largest works of art on paper from its collection. It showed a colorful collection of works on paper, many of which had never been shown before due to their size. Among them was this extraordinary 23-meter-long panoramic painting, which this presentation is about. This presentation is composed of two parts. The first part sketches the historical background of the panoramic painting and briefly discusses the technical analysis of the materials used to make it. And the second part is about the preparations and installation of the panorama for XXL paper. I want to take you back to the spring of 2018, when preparations for the move of the Rijksmuseum's depots to the newly built collection center in Amersfoort were in full swing. Part of the project was photographing all objects without a digital image. In the process, we came across a set of extraordinary rolled-up objects. To our surprise, when unrolled, a series of 6 very colorful European panoramic landscapes opened up before our eyes. When unrolled, the lengths of the landscapes ranged from 8.25 meters to just over 23 meters long, as you see here to scale. All rolls were the same height, 1.8 meters, and they were composed of vertical paper sheets that are lined with a thin textile. We initially had no idea what the function of these enormously long landscapes might have been, nor did we know who has created them. An old inventory card from the 1960s stated that it was 19th century wallpaper, but this seemed rather unlikely because of the lack of cutouts for windows and doors. Because of its enormous length, the longest fragment, here shown at the top, was selected to be exhibited in XXL paper, and in the run-up to the exhibition, only this roll was analyzed and treated. So the question arose, if not wallpaper, then what could it have been used for? To gain more insight, we mapped all the signs of use. Firstly, we noticed these small holes all along the top edge. Many of them were torn at some point and repaired again, implying that the object was hung from the top. Secondly, we noticed these vertical undulations and folds in the landscape that are the silent witness of regular unrolling and re-rolling. Were we possibly dealing with a panorama that had been shown to the public in different locations? A panorama commonly was a circular representational drawing in which the perspective was designed so that the viewer saw it from the center outward. It was popular entertainment for a wide audience in the 19th century, and it came in all sizes. All over Europe and the United States, circular buildings appeared with the sole purpose of showing panoramas. Here we see a drawing by Gerrit Lamberts from 1817, showing the Leidseplein in Amsterdam. The round building on the left is a panorama, which is relatively simple compared to the following. This is a cross-section of the giant rotunda in Leicester Square, London, from 1801, in which you can see visitors walking around. This meters-high canvas possibly was a travelling panorama. So then, going back to our rolls, what to think of this one? That was reinforced with twill tape and then nailed to a wooden pole. On closer inspection, Other rolls had been reinforced similarly and still had rusty traces of nails. They had probably also been attached to wooden poles at some time. In addition to the static canvases, there were also moving panoramas, for which you see a design here. The canvas is attached at the top edge with rings, and on both ends it was attached to a pole. It was set in motion by turning on both sides. This way, in a kind of a theatrical setting, the show slowly passed by the audience. In Europe, this is called a cyclorama. During archival research, we came across descriptions of a cyclorama that traveled the Netherlands from 1853 to 1855, announced in this green leaflet. It was a show as much as 1.5 kilometers long that depicted a journey through the Alpine countries and Italy. The gigantic cyclorama was commissioned and operated by Ferdinand Reichardt. It was painted by the Borgman and Hell brothers. The holes at the top, the traces of multiple times of rolling and unrolling, and the wooden pole, combined with the matching subject of the panoramas, convinced us that we have the remains of what once was Reichardt's traveling cyclorama. 2 of the 6 landscapes were not painted but printed, so we omit them here. The other 4 rolls were painted in a similar style with a matte, water-based paint. Several old newspaper ads gave us an insight into what a performance might have looked like. During a performance of about 2 hours, the landscape was slowly rolled from one end to the other, accompanied by a narrator and music, taking the viewer on a journey, as it were. Composed of multiple rolls, the total was a stunning 1,500 meters long, of which our fragments make up only about 58 meters. To support the hypothesis that this was indeed part of Reichart's cyclorama, we decided to analyze the materials and characteristics: the paper, textile lining, composition and media. Due to time constraints, today we present only a summary of the technical analysis. The panorama has been constructed of 25 large sheets of machine-made paper, measuring 93 centimeters wide and 1.8 meter high. Taking a dive into the paper, microscopy with a polarizing filter showed that it has been composed of mainly hemp on the left and linen fibers on the right. This confirms the paper's high quality. The transparent parts in the image are kaolin, a mineral filler used since 1807, and barium sulfate was detected with Raman spectroscopy, another mineral filler used since 1820. Further, we detected no cotton fibers, nor lignin. After the sheets of paper were painted, they were pasted onto a thin cotton. This cotton consists of 16 pieces in total, with vertical seams, yellow in the image. Any mismatch in overlaps of the sheets were then painted to camouflage them. The textile has been cut flush with the paper edges. To analyze the pigments used, 3 non-destructive methods were employed in situ: XRF, force, and Raman. These techniques are complementary, XRF providing the elemental composition, and force and Raman providing molecular or structural information that adds to the specific characteristic of each pigment. The measurement showed that the cyclorama was painted with only 6 pigments: Prussian blue, red lead, ultramarine, vermilion, chrome yellow, and lead white. While some of these pigments are not traditional but synthetic, they were all in use by 1853. Moreover, we found no aniline dyes. Aniline dyes were invented in 1856 and widely used after 1860. In short, we found no materials that did not exist in 1853 and no materials that suggest a later date of origin. For the analysis of the binding media, we used GCMS and proteomics, and we found proteins from rabbit skin glue. This is a premium quality animal glue, relatively cheap, strong, flexible, and transparent. GCMS also found small amounts of resin in the foreground paint. The presence of chalk in combination with barium sulfate and rabbit's glue in the entire scene confirms the use of so-called distemper or glue paint. Distemper was a cheap matte paint commonly used for painting interiors, in the decorative arts, and for theatre backdrops and scenery. All in all, it seems very plausible that we are indeed dealing with 4 fragments of Reichardt's cyclorama, given its characteristics and traces of use. Since we suspected that the 2 most light-sensitive colors had been used in large parts of the cyclorama and might discolor on longer display, we decided to test the light sensitivity of a larger number of colors using microfading. Two of the 6 colors used in the cyclorama are known to be very light sensitive: chrome yellow and red lead. The colors of Reichardt's cyclorama are still incredibly bright and vivid after all these years. We suspect this is because it was largely rolled up and thus exposed to light only during a performance, thus minimizing the total amount of lux hours. With the microfading test, 35 readings were made at 17 locations. Light fastness is expressed in the blue wool scale, the international standard for light sensitivity, which ranges from 1, very unstable, to 8, very stable. All 35 readings were found to have blue wool scale 3 or lower. 4 of the readings were even below 1 blue scale, if that's even possible. So the panorama is incredibly sensitive to light. Fortunately, the plant exhibition would only last 9 weeks, and it was calculated that there would be no perceptible color change at an illumination of 50 lux. The second part of this presentation deals with the largest fragment of the cyclorama, the only fragment that was conserved and prepared for installation in the XXL paper exhibition. To gain insight into the features and condition of the panorama, all the sheets were documented individually. As you might imagine, it was quite a challenge to work with such an extremely large object in this relatively small space. As if it were a giant scroll, we rolled the panorama onto large cardboard tubes on either side. The tubes were supported by wooden trestles, normally used for holding large tapestries. The large scale again forced us to work in a digital format with the use of high-resolution images and Inkscape software. The panorama was mostly suffered from surface dirt, loose seams, holes, moldy parts, and stains from water damage. From a material test for removing surface dirt, Aqua Wipe Eraser Powder Soft proved most effective. Both the paper and the paint surface were sufficiently smooth and sealed to prevent the smallest eraser particles from remaining between the paper fibers. As you see here, the soiled erased powder was removed with a soft brush and a vacuum cleaner. Along the entire length of the panorama, loose seams, holes and tears were repaired with wheat starch paste and thin Japanese paper. Along the bottom edge of the panorama, there were vertical affected areas, probably caused by moisture. Tests for viable fungal spores and salts were both negative. It seemed as if the refractive index of the paint layer had changed here, giving it a whitish appearance, similar to blanching that sometimes occurs in varnished paintings. After preliminary tests, it was decided to treat these lighter areas locally with two very thin layers of 2% methyl cellulose in demi-water, applied by airbrush. This is a comparison of before treatment on the left and after treatment on the right. The minuscule layer of methyl cellulose has again changed the refractive index of the paint layer, slightly reducing the whitish area underneath the blue arrow. While most of the roll was in excellent condition, the right end that you see here was once on the outside of the roll when it was severely affected by water and mold, leaving the paper incredibly fragile and the fabric very much weakened. That made us decide to temporarily detach this most fragile and damaged part from the rest to enable a separate treatment. The very fragile, almost powdery paper was locally stabilized underneath the paper, working from the front with wheat starch paste and tengucho. Then the cotton lining could be carefully removed from the verso, as you see here. The next step was to turn the paper over using a cylinder, placing it face down on the table. During lining, two layers of Japanese paper were pasted crosswise on the verso to spread the tension. Here a sheet of Japanese paper is placed and stroked down with a soft brush. Again, the exceptional dimensions called for customization, such as the extra long brush. After this, it was turned over again and dried overnight under a blanket. Then it was slightly moistened and stretched on the table. Here you see how loose fragments were positioned to fill the losses in the painting. So the two parts were joined again. This was the result. The cyclorama was meant to be viewed from some distance. We did not retouch anything to clearly show that the gaps and water-damaged part are part of the history of this object. In preparation for mounting on the wall, strips of Japanese paper were applied along the entire edge. The panorama was rolled onto this huge cardboard tube on the right that fit exactly on this wooden cart on the left. The cart was originally designed and built to be used during the Paleis Loos renovation for the installation and the reinstallation of a wallpaper for period rooms. Schematically, here you see how the tube in red fitted exactly onto the wooden frame in blue. It was then tilted vertically and blocked. Here you see how the tube was mounted on the wooden cart. At the top edge of the tube, the strips of Japanese paper were held in place with bulldog clamps. This is an impression of the installation. We had just started rolling it out and attaching it to the wall from right to left. The first team carefully drove the cart parallel to the wall, meanwhile slowly turning the tube, while the second team rolled the two ladders on either side of the panorama. They walked up the ladders, brought the panorama into position and stapled the paper strips on the wall, approximately every 50 centimeters. It was a very controlled and concentrated collaboration. All 23 meters were mounted on the wall in 1.5 hours, and it fit exactly. We knew the object wasn't straight, but still we followed the horizontal laser line projected on the wall, with the intention to later correct it. By working from the center outward, loosening and reattaching the staples, we made sure the panorama ended up running nicely through the corners and hanging smoothly against the wall, with no undulations. However, this turned out to be way more complicated than we expected. After 2 full and tense days of fine-tuning, the panorama was finally satisfactorily aligned with the wall. And this is the result. If you can't get enough of this panorama, in 2022 an article has been published alongside the exhibition in the Rijksmuseum Bulletin, the Rijksbulletin, which explores the cyclorama's provenance. The conservation of the cyclorama has been made possible with the generous support of Bank ten Cate and the Rijksmuseum Fund. We also like to thank the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands and the University of Amsterdam for the analysis and the interpretation of the results. So for now, I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions regarding this topic or something related to the treatment of the object, you can reach me at the Rijksmuseum or some of my colleagues, and they will be willing to answer your questions. And this presentation will be online from now on, thanks to the wonderful internet. So, hooray! Thank you. Goodbye.